The dead man lay among the roses. That is the image I carry still, sharper than any photograph, more vivid than any painter could render, when I think of the Thornfield affair. The November frost had come early that year, rhyming the petals with silver, and there among the last crimson blooms of the season, face down in the dark earth, lay Sir Marcus Thornfield, 3rd Baronet, with the morning dew settling on his dinner jacket like a fine lace shroud. I am Captain Arthur Hastings, and I have seen death in its many guises, on the battlefields of France, in the drawing-rooms of Mayfair, in railway carriages and country lanes, and once, memorably, on the deck of a Nile steamer. But there was something about this death, about the way the red roses framed that still figure like a wreath already laid, that stopped me cold. It was Poirot who found him. My friend had risen at dawn, as was occasionally his custom when a case had wound his mind too tight for sleep. He had dressed with his usual immaculate care. I could never understand how a man could apply wax to his mustaches at 5 in the morning with the same precision he showed at noon, and had gone out for what he called a constitutional, though his version of exercise amounted to a gentle stroll with frequent pauses for thought. He had been thinking a great deal in the 3 days since we had arrived at Thornfield Hall. Thinking and observing and saying remarkably little, which for Poirot was always the most dangerous sign. He came to my room at 6:15. I know the time because the clock on my mantelpiece, a hideous porcelain affair depicting shepherdesses in improbable poses, chimed the quarter hour as he knocked. "Hastings, wake yourself. There has been a development." Something in his voice brought me upright. Not alarm, exactly. Poirot did not do alarm, but a gravity, a weight that told me everything before I'd pulled on my trousers. "Who?" I asked. "Sir Marcus. He is in the rose garden. He is dead." And so I came to that frost-touched garden where the dawn mist clung low to the ground, and a dead man lay among flowers, the color of blood, and the mystery that would afterwards be known, in the more sensational newspapers at least, as the case of the Crimson Widow began its final chapter. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand why Sir Marcus Thornfield died, one must first understand why he lived as he did and who the remarkable woman was around whom this entire affair revolved. One must go back 3 days to the afternoon when Poirot and I first arrived at Thornfield Hall and met the woman they called Lady Isabel. It was Japp who had put us on to it. Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard was not, as a rule, the sort of man who believed in hunches. He was a facts and evidence man, a door-kicker, a chaser down of leads. But that October afternoon in his cramped office at the Yard, with the Thames fog pressing against the windows and the gas fire hissing in the corner, even Japp seemed troubled by something that defied his usual methods. "I've got a feeling about this one, Poirot," he said, which from Japp was roughly equivalent to another man weeping openly. "And I don't like feelings. Feelings don't hold up in court." "Tell me about the feeling, my friend." Japp leaned back, his chair protesting. "Sir Marcus Thornfield, Baronet, 58 years old, married 3 times. 3, I said. 3. And here's the thing that gives me the creeps. His first 2 wives are dead." Poirot's fingers came together, forming that steeple I knew so well. "The manner of death?" "First wife, Catherine, née Barrington, died in 1919. Pneumonia, the death certificate says. She'd been ill for some months. Perfectly natural, according to the family doctor. No inquest. And the second, Eleanor, née Sutherland, died in 1925. Heart failure. She was only 34, which is young for a heart to give out, but it happens. The attending physician, different doctor this time, a London man, signed it off without question. And now there is a 3rd wife. Lady Isabel. Born Isabel Devereux. French mother, English father. Married Sir Marcus 18 months ago. She's 29, beautiful by all accounts. Very charming, very popular in the county. And you're feeling, mon cher Jap? Jap rubbed his jaw. 3 weeks ago, I got an anonymous letter, typed, posted from Cirencester. No fingerprints. It said, and I'm quoting from memory, "If you wish to prevent a third tragedy at Thornfield Hall, you should investigate the history of Sir Marcus Thornfield's marriages. The pattern is unmistakable to anyone who cares to look." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A pattern? Yes. That is a word that interests Hercule Poirot very much. But the letter suggests the danger is to the third wife, not to Sir Marcus himself. That's how I read it. Someone thinks Lady Isabel is in danger, or, Jap hesitated, or someone wishes us to think that she is, when the truth is rather different. Right, Jap nodded heavily. See why I've got a feeling? I can't launch an official investigation on the basis of an anonymous letter. There's no evidence of any crime. 2 women died of natural causes years apart. But if I ignore this and something happens, you would never forgive yourself, and the newspapers would never allow you to forget. Exactly. Poirot was quiet for a moment. Then, Sir Marcus has a house party next weekend, does he not? I've read it in the society columns. Jap blinked. You read the society columns? I read everything, mon ami. One never knows whether useful information it will appear. Sir Marcus is hosting a shooting weekend at Thornfield Hall. The guest list includes several persons of note. You want an invitation? I want to observe, to place myself within the household, to see the dynamics, to understand the relationships. If there is a pattern, Hastings and I will find it. If there is danger, we will prevent it. And if the anonymous letter is merely mischief, well, we shall have enjoyed a weekend in the Gloucestershire countryside, and I shall complain about the coffee. Jap grinned for the first time that afternoon. I'll make a call. Sir Marcus is acquainted with a friend of mine at the Home Office. We'll have you invited before tea. And so, 2 days later, Poirot and I found ourselves motoring through the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, the fields golden with late harvest, the trees burning their last bright colors before winter stripped them bare. Thornfield Hall sat in a shallow valley encircled by ancient oaks. It was not the grandest house I had ever visited. It lacked the swagger of the great ducal palaces, but it had a sombre beauty that arrested the eye. Tudor in origin, extended in the Georgian period, it was a house of dark timbers and pale stone, of deep-set windows and tall chimneys, with a rose garden to the south that was, even in late October, still blazing crimson. Remarkable, I said. The roses. Yes, Poirot murmured. Sir Marcus is known for them, a passionate gardener. He breeds his own varieties. The crimson climber on the south wall, I believe, is named after his first wife, Catherine's glory. There was something unsettling about that. A man who names flowers after dead wives, though I could not have articulated why. We were met at the front door by a butler of the old school, ancient, upright, with a face that suggested he had seen everything the human race could offer and had not been impressed. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Sir Marcus is expecting you. The other guests have already arrived. If you would follow me. The great hall was panelled in oak so dark it was nearly black. A fire roared in a stone hearth wide enough to roast an ox. Above the mantelpiece hung a portrait, a woman in a crimson dress, dark-haired, with eyes that followed you across the room. The First Lady Thornfield? I murmured to Poirot. No, he replied softly. Look at the date. 1929. That is the current Lady Thornfield, Isabel. I looked again. The woman in the portrait was extraordinarily beautiful. Not in the conventional English way, but with a continental allure, high cheekbones and full lips and a gaze that held yours with an almost physical force. The crimson dress seemed to glow against the dark background, as though the painter had mixed his pigment with actual fire. Monsieur Poirot, a voice rang out across the hall. warm, musical, accented with the faintest trace of France. How wonderful! I've heard so much. Lady Isabel Thornfield descended the staircase with the grace of a woman who knew exactly the effect she created. In person, she was even more striking than in the portrait. Tall, slender, wearing a simple dress of deep burgundy that echoed the crimson of the painting. Her dark hair was pinned in a style that was both elegant and careless, and her smile, as she extended her hand to Poirot, was of the sort that makes men do foolish things. Lady Thornfield, the pleasure is entirely mine. Isabel, please, we do not stand on ceremony here, and you must be Captain Hastings. She turned that smile on me, and I confess I felt its warmth like a lamp turned in my direction. The chronicler, the man who writes the stories. I try to keep a record. He is modest, Poirot said, rescuing me. As always. Come, Marcus is in the library. He is dying to meet you. She paused, and something flickered behind her eyes. A shadow, barely perceptible. That is perhaps a poor choice of words, given the circumstances. The circumstances, madame. You are here because someone wrote a letter, are you not? A letter suggesting that I am in danger. She met Poirot's gaze directly. Marcus told me, we have no secrets, and I want you to know, Monsieur Poirot, that I am not afraid. If someone wishes me harm, I would rather face it in the open than hide behind curtains. Admirable, madame. But the brave and the reckless sometimes share the same grave. Her smile dimmed slightly. Then I shall rely on you to tell me which I am being. She led us through a series of rooms, each more darkly furnished than the last, as though the house had been decorated by someone who distrusted sunlight on principle, to the library, where Sir Marcus Thornfield waited. He was not what I had expected. Given the anonymous letter and its implications, I had prepared myself for a Bluebeard figure. Sinister, domineering, the kind of man from whom wives might flee. Instead, Sir Marcus was mild. That is the only word. A mild-looking man of middle years with thinning fair hair, spectacles, and the soft, slightly distracted manner of an academic. His handshake was gentle. His smile was genuine. He looked, frankly, like the last man on earth who might be suspected of dispatching 2 wives. Monsieur Poirot, thank God you're here. This business has shaken me badly. You received the anonymous letter yourself? No, it was sent to Scotland Yard. But Japp telephoned me. I insisted you be invited. If someone is making accusations against me, or threatening Isabel, I want the best man in England looking into it. The best man in England is Belgian, Poirot corrected mildly. Sir Marcus did not quite know what to do with this, so he offered us sherry instead. The other guests gathered for drinks before dinner, and what a collection they were. Colonel Hugh Pemberton, a bluff, red-faced man of 60 who had served with Sir Marcus's father and acted as a kind of unofficial uncle to the family. He had known both the first and second wives and made no secret of his opinion that Sir Marcus had been unlucky in love. Damned bad luck, he boomed, swirling his whiskey. Catherine was a lovely girl. Eleanor, too, in her way. Marcus doesn't deserve what's happened to him. Miss Annabel Thornfield, Sir Marcus's younger sister, a sharp-eyed woman of 45 who had never married and who managed the estate's accounts with, I was told, formidable efficiency. She greeted us with a politeness that held no warmth whatsoever. Another detective, she said flatly. I suppose Japp thinks Marcus is murdering his wives. How refreshing. Mr. Oliver Hale, Sir Marcus's business partner, who managed the family's investments in the city. He was as perhaps 50, well-groomed, watchful, with the particular alertness of a man who spends his days calculating risk. He and Lady Isabel, I noticed, avoided looking at each other, the kind of avoidance that is itself a form of attention. And finally, Mrs. Rachel Sutherland, Eleanor's mother, the dead second wife's mother, still living, still visiting the house where her daughter had died. She was perhaps 70, white-haired, frail, but her eyes. Good Lord, her eyes were sharp as needles. "I've been waiting, Monsieur Poirot," she said, taking his hand in both of hers. "I have been waiting 7 years for someone to ask the right questions about my daughter." "And what are the right questions, madame?" "Why a healthy woman of 34 died of heart failure? Why the doctor never ordered a proper post-mortem, and why my son-in-law married again within a year?" The dinner table that evening crackled with suppressed tensions. Sir Marcus sat at the head, Lady Isabel at the foot, and between them the guests conducted conversation like soldiers navigating a minefield. Carefully, with constant awareness of where the explosions might come from. Colonel Pemberton talked loudly about the shoot planned for the following day. Miss Annabel ate in silence, her gaze moving between her brother and his wife with an expression I could not read. Oliver Hale was charming and evasive in equal measure, deflecting every personal question with a light remark. And Mrs. Sutherland? Mrs. Sutherland watched Lady Isabel with an intensity that made the air between them vibrate. "You remind me of my daughter," she said suddenly during a lull in conversation. Lady Isabel's fork paused. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sutherland. I did not know Eleanor, but Marcus speaks of her often." "He should. She was his wife. She trusted him." "Rachel," Sir Marcus said quietly. A warning. "She trusted everyone in this house," Mrs. Sutherland continued as though he had not spoken, "and one of them killed her." The silence that followed was absolute. Forks stopped. Glasses hung suspended. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its tick. "Mrs. Sutherland." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "That is a very serious accusation." "It is not an accusation, Monsieur Poirot. It is a conviction. I've carried it for 7 years. My daughter did not die of heart failure. She was poisoned, and the person who poisoned her is sitting at this table." No one slept well that night. I know I did not. Mrs. Sutherland's accusation had landed like a grenade at the center of the dinner table, and the shrapnel had struck everyone. The following morning, while the shooting party assembled, Colonel Pemberton in high spirits, Gerald the gamekeeper loading the gun cart, Oliver Hale looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else, Poirot declined to participate, and instead began what he called his investigations. "You will join the shoot, Hastings. Your eyes and ears, they are useful, even when your conclusions, they are not." "Thanks very much." "De rien. Observe who talks to whom, who avoids whom, who handles a gun with confidence. These things tell stories." I went to the shoot. Poirot went to work. Over the course of that long morning, while pheasants fell like feathered cannonballs from a grey Gloucestershire sky, Poirot conducted a series of private conversations that would later prove to be the foundations upon which the entire case turned. He spoke first to Mrs. Sutherland. She told him, this I learned afterwards, from Poirot's account, that Eleanor had been in perfect health until approximately 3 months before her death. She had been vivacious, active, a keen horsewoman and tennis player. Then, gradually, she had begun to decline. Fatigue first, then headaches, then numbness in her extremities, a persistent metallic taste in her mouth, and episodes of vomiting that her doctor attributed to a nervous condition. I begged her to see a specialist, Mrs. Sutherland told Poirot. But Marcus said Dr. Fenton, their local man, was perfectly adequate. He said specialists would only alarm her, and Eleanor trusted Marcus. She always trusted Marcus. The doctor, this Dr. Fenton, he is still practicing. He died 2 years ago, a stroke. Very convenient, wouldn't you say? Poirot did not comment on the convenience or otherwise of Dr. Fenton's demise. Instead, he asked about Eleanor's relationship with her husband. She adored him in the beginning, but the last year, something changed. She became secretive. She began locking her desk. Once I found her burning letters in her bedroom fireplace. She said they were old correspondence, but her hands were shaking. You believe she discovered something? I believe she discovered something about Catherine, about the first wife's death, and I believe it frightened her. Did she share this with anyone? She mentioned a name. Once in her final weeks. She said, "If anything happens to me, speak to Annabel. Annabel knows everything." But when I approached Annabel after Eleanor's death, she denied any knowledge. She looked me in the eye and lied. Poirot's second conversation was with Miss Annabel Thornfield herself. I would have given a great deal to witness it, for Annabel was not a woman who yielded information easily. She was, as I have said, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, with the defensive posture of someone who has spent a lifetime protecting secrets, whether her own or others. According to Poirot, the conversation began with stonewalling and ended with revelation. "Mademoiselle, your late sister-in-law, Eleanor, told her mother that you possessed certain knowledge that she considered important. Eleanor was ill. She said many things at the end. Things that were untrue, things that were confused. Then you deny that Eleanor shared any information with you." "I deny nothing and confirm nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I am not on trial. No one is on trial, but 2 women are dead, and a third may be in danger. If you know something that bears upon their deaths, your silence makes you complicit." A long pause. Then Annabel said, very quietly, "Catherine kept a diary." "The first wife?" "Yes. She was a meticulous woman. She recorded everything, her health, her daily routine, what she ate and drank, her conversations with Marcus. She began the diary when she first fell ill because she sensed something was wrong and she wanted a record." "Where is this diary now?" "I have it. Eleanor found it hidden in the library, in a book of botanical illustrations. Marcus would never have looked there. He reads nothing but gardening manuals. Eleanor showed it to me 2 months before she died. What the diary describes—" Annabel's composure fractured briefly. "What it describes is a systematic poisoning. Catherine recorded her symptoms day by day. The metallic taste, the stomach pains, the weakness in her limbs. She even wrote at one point, 'I believe someone is putting something in my food. God help me, I think it is the tonic.' The tonic. Dr. Fenton prescribed her a daily tonic, an iron supplement, supposedly, for her constitution. Catherine took it every evening. It was prepared by the household and kept in her room. And you believe this tonic was the vehicle for the poison? I believe Catherine was given arsenic over a period of months in doses small enough to mimic chronic illness. I believe it was disguised in or substituted for her tonic. And I believe my brother is either the most unfortunate man in England or the most wicked." "Which do you believe, mademoiselle?" A silence that seemed to last minutes. Then, "I love my brother, Monsieur Poirot, but love does not make me blind. It makes me afraid." Poirot recounted these conversations to me that evening, as we sat in the small parlor that had been allocated for our use. The shooting party had returned. The bag had been counted. 23 brace of pheasant, which Colonel Pemberton declared disappointing. And dinner was still an hour away. "So," I said, struggling to absorb it all, "Catherine was poisoned. Eleanor probably was too, and the anonymous letter was right. There's a pattern." "A pattern, yes. But patterns can be read in different ways, Hastings. The most obvious reading is that Sir Marcus killed both his wives. He had opportunity. He controlled the household. He selected the doctors. He married again each time, quickly. The evidence, it points toward him like a compass needle toward north." "Well then, surely that's it." Poirot shook his head slowly. "Too simple, mon ami. Too neat. When a mystery arranges itself this conveniently, when the evidence practically presents itself on a silver tray, Hercule Poirot becomes suspicious. Not of the evidence, but of the arrangement." "What do you mean?" "I mean that someone has been building a case against Sir Marcus for a very long time. The anonymous letter. Mrs. Sutherland's convenient presence at this house party. She was invited. Hastings specifically invited. The diary, preserved and hidden, waiting to be discovered. Each piece leads us toward one conclusion, that Sir Marcus is a serial wife killer. And you think he isn't? I think, Hastings, that we have been looking at the portrait when we should have been examining the frame. He rose and went to the window. Outside, the November dusk was falling fast, turning the rose garden to shadow. Tell me about the shoot today. What did you observe? I reported what I had seen. Colonel Pemberton in jovial form, discussing memories of Catherine with anyone who would listen. Oliver Hale distracted, missing easy shots, his attention seemingly drawn back to the house. And something else. Something I'd almost dismissed but which Poirot seized upon. During the last drive, when we stopped for refreshment, I saw Lady Isabel cross the lawn toward the east wing. She entered a door that, as far as I know, leads to the old servants' quarters. Alone? Alone. She was gone perhaps 20 minutes. When she returned, she looked, well, not upset exactly, but preoccupied, as though she'd received news. Or delivered it, Poirot murmured. Hastings, I want you to do something for me tonight. After dinner, when the house is quiet, I want you to explore the east wing, the old servants' quarters. Tell me what you find. You think something's hidden there. I think the east wing is the part of this house that no one talks about. In my experience, the rooms no one mentions are the rooms that matter most. I went to the east wing at 11 o'clock, after the household had retired. The corridors were dark. The electric lighting did not extend to this older portion of the house. And I carried a torch that cast uncertain shadows on the bare plaster walls. The servants' quarters had been closed up years ago when the household staff was reduced from 12 to 4. Dust sheets covered the furniture. Cobwebs hung from lintels. The air smelled of disuse and damp, with an undertone of something else. Something sharp and chemical that I could not identify. I checked room after room. Nothing. Bare mattresses, empty wardrobes, the detritus of lives long since moved on. I was about to give up when I noticed at the end of the corridor a door that did not match the others. It was newer. The wood was darker, the hinges oiled, and it was locked. I am not, as a rule, the sort of man who picks locks. But Poirot had taught me a trick with a hairpin, and after several minutes of fumbling I managed to turn the mechanism. The room beyond was small, windowless, and had been converted into something that made my blood run cold. A workbench ran along one wall, laden with glass bottles, a pestle and mortar, a small brass scale of the sort used by pharmacists, and a collection of jars containing dried herbs and what appeared to be mineral compounds. A notebook lay open beside them, filled with meticulous entries in a hand I did not recognize. Quantities, dates, chemical formulae. On a shelf above the bench stood a row of small brown bottles, each labeled in the same careful hand. I read the labels with growing horror. Arsenicum album, belladonna, aconitum napellus, and a larger bottle, half empty, labeled simply solution, 1 grain per fluid ounce. I had found, in the east wing of Thornfield Hall, a poison laboratory. I touched nothing. I retreated the way I had come, locked the door behind me, and went straight to Poirot. He listened to my account without interruption, his face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "The notebook," he said at last. "The handwriting. Did you recognize it?" "No. It was very precise, very regular, almost mechanical." "Male or female, would you say?" I thought. I couldn't be certain. It was neat, controlled, possibly female, but I wouldn't swear to it. "And the solution, 1 grain per fluid ounce. That is a preparation of arsenic, Hastings. At that concentration, a tablespoon added daily to food or drink would produce gradual, cumulative poisoning over a period of weeks. The symptoms would mimic chronic illness, exactly as Catherine described in her diary. Then someone in this house has been manufacturing poison. For years, perhaps. For years. And using it. Poirot's expression was the gravest I had ever seen. Tomorrow, Hastings, we must move quickly. I believe the killer intends to strike again, and I believe the intended victim is not who we have been led to think. Not Lady Isabel. The anonymous letter told us to protect the third wife. But what if the letter was written by the killer? What if its purpose was not to prevent a crime, but to direct our attention away from the true target? Then who? Who has been asking dangerous questions? Who has been demanding investigations? Who has declared openly at the dinner table that she knows one of the household is a murderer? The answer hit me like cold water. Mrs. Sutherland, Eleanor's mother. The woman who would not be silenced. The woman who wrote, I believe, to Annabel Thornfield after Eleanor's death. The woman who has spent 7 years gathering evidence. If there is one person in this house who threatens the killer's safety, it is Rachel Sutherland. But she's an old woman. She's frail. She is formidable, Hastings. The frailty is of the body, not the spirit, and that is precisely what makes her dangerous. To the killer and to herself. Dawn broke grey and bitter. I woke to the sound of raised voices from somewhere below. Not shouting exactly, but the heated murmur of an argument conducted through clenched teeth. I dressed quickly and found Poirot already in the corridor, dressed impeccably, his ear tilted toward the staircase with the frankly unashamed posture of a man who considered eavesdropping a professional obligation. "Hale and Lady Isabel," he whispered, "in the morning room." Fragments reached us. Hale's voice, tight with emotion, "Cannot go on like this. You promised." And Lady Isabel, cooler, steadier, "Not yet. You must trust me, when the time is right." A door opened. Footsteps. Silence. Poirot and I descended to breakfast, where the household gathered with the strained politeness of people who had all heard something they wished they hadn't. Mrs. Sutherland was not at breakfast. "She's taken a tray in her room," the maid said. "Said she wasn't feeling well." Poirot set down his coffee cup. "Not feeling well." These specific words she used? "Yes, sir. She said she had a headache and a queasy stomach." Poirot was on his feet instantly. "Hastings, now." We took the stairs 2 at a time. I did, at any rate. Poirot managed a dignified, rapid ascent that somehow kept pace. Mrs. Sutherland's room was on the first floor, overlooking the rose garden. Poirot knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. "Mrs. Sutherland, it is Poirot. Please open the door." A faint sound from within. A groan. I put my shoulder to the door and it gave easily. The room smelled of chamomile tea and something else. That same sharp chemical note I had detected in the east wing. Mrs. Sutherland sat in the armchair by the window, a breakfast tray on the table beside her. She was pale, shaking, her hands gripping the armrests. A cup of tea sat half drunk on the tray. "Something in the tea," she whispered. "Bitter. I only took 2 sips and then—" The burning in my throat. Poirot moved to the tray. He lifted the cup, sniffed it. His face went very still. "Hastings, fetch the others, all of them, to the library, immediately." But Mrs. Sutherland. "She has ingested a small dose. She will survive, but she must take nothing more until we are certain. Madame, drink only water, from the tap, nothing that has been prepared for you." Mrs. Sutherland nodded weakly. Her eyes, even now, blazed with that fierce intelligence. "I knew they would try. I knew it. You knew. And still you came." "I came because my daughter cannot speak for herself, Monsieur Poirot. Someone must." I ran. I gathered them, and within 20 minutes the household assembled in the library of Thornfield Hall for what would prove to be one of the most remarkable scenes I have ever witnessed in all my years at Poirot's side. Sir Marcus stood by the fireplace, bewildered and frightened. Lady Isabel sat in a straight-backed chair, her composure intact, but her knuckles white. Colonel Pemberton had taken up a position near the door, his military instincts placing him where he could observe the room. Annabel Thornfield perched on the edge of a settee, her eyes moving between her brother and his wife. Oliver Hale stood by the window, his face unreadable, and Poirot stood at the center of them all. Mesdames et messieurs, this morning an attempt was made to poison Mrs. Rachel Sutherland. This is the third poisoning connected to this household. It will be the last. He began to pace, not his usual measured stroll, but with a restless energy I had rarely seen. When I came to this house, I was told a simple story. 2 wives dead, a third in danger. An anonymous letter suggesting Sir Marcus was a killer. The evidence appeared to support this narrative. The symptoms described in Catherine's diary, the convenient deaths, the pattern of remarriage. I was meant to arrive at a single conclusion, that Sir Marcus Thornfield is a wife-killer. He stopped, turned. But Hercule Poirot does not accept the conclusion that is offered to him. He makes his own. Let us begin with what is true. Catherine Thornfield was poisoned. Her diary, which Mademoiselle Annabel has preserved for over 10 years, describes a textbook case of chronic arsenic exposure. The symptoms, the progression, the metallic taste, everything is consistent. Eleanor Thornfield, I believe, died in the same manner. The heart failure that killed a healthy 34-year-old woman was almost certainly the final crisis of arsenic poisoning. Sir Marcus had gone white. You're saying someone killed them? Both of them? Under my roof? Under your roof and under your nose, Sir Marcus. And the person who did it was not you. A collective intake of breath. You see, Poirot continued, Sir Marcus lacks the one quality essential to a poisoner: patience. Poisoning is a crime of slow, methodical calculation. It requires weeks, sometimes months of careful administration. It requires the ability to sit across from one's victim at breakfast, to smile, to ask after their health, while knowing that each day brings them closer to death. Sir Marcus, forgive me, is not capable of such sustained deception. He is, at heart, a simple man, an honest man, a man who grows roses because they are beautiful, not because they are useful. Then who? Annabel's voice was barely a whisper. Poirot's gaze settled on Lady Isabel. The room went very still. Lady Thornfield, or should I say, Mademoiselle Isabel Devereux, because that is who you truly are, is it not? Not a French-English lady of good family, but the daughter of Marguerite Devereux, who was tried in Lyon in 1918 for the arsenic murder of her husband. Lady Isabel did not move, did not blink. The composure that had so impressed me from the first moment held absolutely firm. The case was notorious in France, though little known in England, Poirot continued. Marguerite Devereux was acquitted. The evidence was insufficient, but the suspicion destroyed her. She died in poverty 2 years later. Her daughter, Isabel, was raised by relatives. She grew up beautiful, charming, well-educated, and with one terrible inheritance, her mother's knowledge. This is absurd, Lady Isabel said, but her voice carried a tremor now. The first crack in the facade. Is it? Last night, Captain Hastings discovered a laboratory hidden in the east wing of this house, a workbench equipped for the preparation of poisons, bottles of arsenic solution, a notebook in a hand that I believe analysis will prove to be yours. Anyone could have. No, not anyone. The room was locked. The key was on your person. I observed it this morning on the chain around your neck, beside the locket you wear always. A laboratory requires knowledge, and you have it. Your mother taught you, perhaps, or you learned on your own, driven by the same compulsions that drove her. Poirot's voice grew quiet, almost gentle. You married Sir Marcus not for love, but for the same reason you prepared the anonymous letter, to create a narrative. The poor wife in danger, the monstrous husband. When the time came for Sir Marcus to die, and I believe that time was approaching, you would be the grieving widow, the innocent victim of a man who had already killed twice. No one would suspect you. How could they? You were the third wife. The pattern would convict Marcus from beyond the grave. But Catherine, Eleanor, were killed by someone else. That is the terrible irony. Their deaths were real, their poisoning was real, but they were not your doing. They were committed by a person who has been part of this household far longer than you. A person who loved Sir Marcus with an intensity that twisted into something monstrous. Poirot turned, and every eye in the room followed his gaze. To Annabel. "You cannot mean," Sir Marcus began. "Mademoiselle Annabel, you managed the household accounts. You oversaw the kitchen, the pantry, the preparation of meals. You had absolute access to every room in this house, including the private apartments of both Catherine and Eleanor. And you had a motive that is as old as humanity itself." Annabel had risen from her settee. Her face was bloodless. "You loved your brother, mademoiselle. Not as a sister loves a brother, but with a possessive, consuming devotion that could not tolerate any rival. Catherine took him from you. Eleanor took him from you. Each time he married, you lost him anew, and each time you reclaimed him. With patience, with arsenic, with the slow, terrible arithmetic of poison." "No," the word came out strangled. "Catherine's diary tells us. The tonic was prepared in the kitchen under your supervision. Eleanor's health declined during a period when you were managing every aspect of the household while Sir Marcus was in London on business. The pattern is not 3 dead wives, mademoiselle. The pattern is one jealous sister." Annabel's hands were shaking. She looked at her brother, a look of such raw, desperate appeal that I felt my throat tighten. "Marcus, don't believe him. I would never—" "The diary, mademoiselle. You preserved it. You showed it to Eleanor. Why? Because you wanted her to suspect her husband. You wanted her to be afraid. You wanted her to leave. But Eleanor did not leave. She stayed, and she began to investigate, and so you had no choice. You poisoned her too." "And Mrs. Sutherland?" I said, the pieces falling into place. Annabel knew she was getting close to the truth. She's been asking questions for 7 years. This weekend was the final opportunity to silence her before Poirot could hear what she had to say. Poirot nodded, except that Mrs. Sutherland, with the instincts of a woman who has survived 7 decades, took only 2 sips of the poisoned tea, and Hercule Poirot arrived at her door before the damage was done. Colonel Pemberton stepped forward. "Annabel, is this true?" She did not answer. She stood in the center of the room, her arms at her sides, her face a mask of something that was beyond grief, beyond rage, a blankness, as though the structures that had held her personality in place had simply collapsed. Then she spoke, 3 words, quiet as a closing door. "He was mine." The room was silent for a long time after that. Inspector Morris arrived from Cirencester that afternoon. Annabel Thornfield was arrested on charges of murder and attempted murder. She went quietly, which somehow made it worse. Sir Marcus did not watch her leave. He sat in the library with his face in his hands, and the sound of his grief was the most desolate thing I have heard outside of war. Lady Isabel's situation was more complicated. The poison laboratory was hers. The anonymous letter was hers. Her intentions, while not yet murderous, were clearly criminal. She had married Sir Marcus with the eventual aim of, what? Poisoning him for his money? Framing him for the earlier murders? Creating a situation in which his death would seem like the natural culmination of a pattern she had manufactured? Poirot presented the evidence to Inspector Morris, who arrested her on charges of conspiracy and possession of poisons with intent. She would have killed him eventually, Poirot told me that evening as we prepared to depart. The laboratory was not theoretical. The arsenic solution was prepared to the precise concentration needed for chronic poisoning. She was waiting for the right moment, for the narrative to be fully established. Another month, perhaps 2, and Sir Marcus would have begun to decline. Another year, and he would have been dead, and Isabel would have been the tragic crimson widow of Thornfield, grieving beautifully in her crimson dress, inheriting a fortune and a reputation as a victim. But she didn't know about Annabel. No, that is what makes this case extraordinary. Two poisoners in the same household, each unaware of the other. Annabel, who had been killing for years out of pathological devotion to her brother, and Isabel, who was preparing to kill for money and security, using the earlier deaths as cover for her own intended crime. Ça, my God, what are the odds? In a house built on secrets, Hastings, the odds are better than you think. Deception attracts deception. One lie creates the conditions in which another can flourish. Thornfield Hall was not merely a house. It was an ecosystem of concealment, and in such an environment, evil multiplies. And Oliver Hale, that argument we overheard, was he involved? Hale was Isabel's lover, not a conspirator but a fool, in love with a woman who had marked his business partner for death. He suspected something was wrong but lacked the courage to confront it. His argument with Isabel that morning was an attempt to persuade her to leave before matters went further. He will testify at her trial, I expect, with the earnest regret of a man who allowed his heart to overrule his conscience. And Mrs. Sutherland, will she be all right? She is already planning her statement for the prosecution. I would not wish to be the defense barrister who faces Rachel Sutherland in the witness box. She has waited 7 years for this moment. She will not waste it. We drove back to London the following morning. The Cotswolds lay quiet under a blanket of November mist, the fields grey-green and empty. Poirot sat beside me in the passenger seat, uncharacteristically silent, watching the landscape slide past. "You're troubled," I said. "I'm thinking, Hastings, about roses." Roses. Sir Marcus named his finest crimson rose after Catherine, his first wife. Catherine's glory. He tended it for 10 years, devoted himself to it, pruned it and fed it and protected it from frost. And all the while, the woman who killed Catherine walked freely through his garden, lived under his roof, managed his household, sat across from him at breakfast. Annabel, who loved him so completely that she destroyed everyone else who tried to love him. There is a species of vine, Hastings, that wraps itself around a tree so tightly that it eventually strangles it. The vine does not know it is killing the tree. It only knows it must hold on. I said nothing. What could one say? And then Isabel, Poirot continued. Beautiful Isabel, in her crimson dress, naming herself the Crimson Widow before the crime was even committed. She saw the history of Thornfield Hall, the dead wives, the grieving husband, and she saw not tragedy but opportunity. She would become the final chapter in a story written by someone else's madness, and she would profit from it. He shook his head slowly. 2 women, 2 poisoners, one driven by love, the other by greed. And between them a man who wanted nothing more than to grow roses in peace. That, Hastings, is the cruelty of the thing. Sir Marcus was not a villain. He was not even a fool. He was simply a man who could not see what was happening in his own house because the people closest to him had conspired, each independently, to ensure he never would. We drove on. London rose to meet us, its chimneys and spires materializing from the fog like a city assembling itself from memory. "One thing I still don't understand," I said. "The anonymous letter. Isabel wrote it to set up the narrative of the dangerous husband. But the letter also brought you to Thornfield. Didn't she realize you'd uncover her scheme?" Poirot's mustache performed its most eloquent ripple. She believed she was too clever for Hercule Poirot. Many people believe this. They are always wrong, but the belief itself is remarkably persistent. Arrogance, the most reliable weakness, Hastings. More reliable than greed, more reliable than love. Arrogance makes the clever person believe they have thought of everything, and it is always, always, the one thing they have not thought of that undoes them. What was it in this case, the one thing she didn't think of? Catherine's diary. Isabel did not know it existed. She had researched the deaths of both wives, had studied the medical records, had even obtained copies of the death certificates. But the diary, Catherine's private, hidden record of her own poisoning, was known only to Annabel and to Eleanor. It was the one thread that connected the real murders to the real murderer, and it lay entirely outside Isabel's carefully constructed narrative. The truth was hiding where she wasn't looking. Précisément. And that, Hastings, is why the little grey cells will always triumph over the cleverest scheme. Because schemes are built on what we know, but truth lives in what we have overlooked. We arrived back at Whitehaven Mansions to find Mrs. Pearson in a state of high dudgeon over a burst pipe in the kitchen, which had, she informed us, rendered the stove inoperable and therefore any question of supper quite impossible. Poirot received this news with an equanimity that suggested his mind was still far away, among the crimson roses and the dark corridors of Thornfield Hall. "Then we shall dine out, Hastings. There is a small restaurant in Soho where the patron is Belgian and the carbonade is without equal. We shall eat well, drink modestly, and speak of simple things. No more murder. No more murder." He paused at the door of his bedroom, his hand on the brass handle. "At least until tomorrow morning, when the post arrives and some desperate person writes to Hercule Poirot begging for help, and we begin again." He smiled. That rare, warm smile that broke through the vanity and the fussiness and the absurd precision and revealed the man beneath. "That is the life we have chosen, mon ami. Or rather, it is the life that has chosen us. And I confess, I would not change it for anything, not even for properly cooked vegetables." I laughed. And somewhere in Gloucestershire, in a frost-touched garden where crimson roses bloomed among the ghosts of dead women, the wind stirred the last petals from the stems and scattered them across the dark earth, like drops of blood on freshly turned soil.